Hey, everybody. Hope everyone is well. Again, late this morning, already afternoon, my time for stream. But I just want to update on some numbers for Ukraine today. We had the Bitcoin monetary base macro update yesterday. Um, and I had to get some figures in before this, week ended, just to update in case you haven't been following on what's going on the ground and to the people of Ukraine. So this was already news yesterday, I'm sure, if you've been following a little bit. The Russians finally reached 1 million casualties. All right. And finally is not really the right word. It's quite soon. Right? They were in Afghanistan for 10 years, 50,000 casualties, I believe. Not even 50,000 deaths. 1 million casualties in Ukraine. So just devastating for them, yet they're continuing to keep it up. You do see that the onslaught, the meat waves, have slightly come down on average from being as high as before Trump being inaugurated up to 1,500, 1,600 per day. And the average, now we're coming down to something like 1,000 per day. It's not stopping the drones, though. Here, drone attacks. All right. Ukraine has, this is all from the armed forces of Ukraine, 40,000 drones in the course of this war have been attacked on Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people have died. And you see here, this number is going up. Okay. So during the Trump Putin phone call right here, it was actually increasing, not decreasing, whatever Trump was trying to do. And now it seems to be increasing again. So a couple hundred drones a night on Ukrainian civilians, not at all on military infrastructure like Ukraine does, even though Ukraine is the aggrieved in this process. Good morning, Anders. Good morning. Drone attacks are rising. I saw that Trump, just want to say, so I do follow American news probably more than any other news, even Latvian news. But I also don't try to get bogged down in it, right? And I hope that that's people understand that's not what I'm trying to do with this channel. I'm just trying to give some big picture stats, whether it's on Bitcoin or war or macro. We'll talk about macro in a second. But I did see that again, Trump went on this. When I say not get bogged down, I mean I don't really watch the chat shows or what people are talking about, this topic or that topic. Of course, I saw that there was an interview yesterday, or I don't know, it's Trump on the podium somewhere talking about, again, how somehow Putin was fighting in World War II. And even though they were allied with the Nazis for the first 2 years of the war, of course, they did end up taking the vast majority of the Nazi regime down on the Eastern Front. But he's just trying, again, just to cover and to equivocate between what Ukraine is actually doing or fighting for against Russia's aggression. And just you see here, again, Putin makes these goofy press conferences. This is not ending here. Okay, so Russia is militarizing for war with Europe. Putin told its generals the new state armament program must focus on developing the most advanced weapons systems. All right. So he just sits there, puppets more stuff. And apparently this is all for peace negotiations that Trump so wisely was able to forecast. Remember, Zelensky says Trump is in a disinformation bubble. J.D. Vance counters and says, no, of course that's not true. And then we see who was right. This is perhaps the scariest thing we've seen in a long time. This is an actual U.S. senator I'm sure you've seen this if you've even tangentially followed the news. All right, attending a hearing from dog killer Kristi Noem, and he was detained. I guess he wasn't at the end of the day arrested, but he was detained, handcuffed, pushed to the ground for asking a question at the meeting. They're saying accounts vary. You can ask Grok what happened, I guess. Regardless of what happened, I understand he just tried to ask a question and then was shoved around the room. Even if he was pushy himself, there is a Rubicon here, and it starts to feel like maybe it's going to be crossed. We all know that there's going to be a military parade tomorrow, Trump's birthday tank parade, protests all around America. As Ukrainians are getting killed every day, obviously there are plenty of other hot spots around the world, but it's pretty wild to see this. Good morning, Sandro. Sandro. Sandro, right? I need to say. Sorry. 75% of battlefield casualties in the war are from drones. Yes. Total change in tactics. Good point. So you look at this. I've heard those figures as well over the last couple weeks, months. 60, 75% of everything is now in drones. And this goes from the civilian safari that they've done in Kherson, actually targeting civilians, which is a war crime. Another thing I wanted to focus on was Ukraine, the latest. So if you have not seen this show, Ukraine, the latest, I'll just pull it up on Twitter. It's a Telegraph production. And they had a interview yesterday with Miss Matviichuk, I believe her name is, who is it's this human rights, basically the main human rights NGO in Ukraine. And I met her actually in Oslo a couple years ago at the Oslo Freedom Forum. She ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize, although weirdly they had to share that with some Russian NGOs. Again, I commented on that yesterday. I'm for a big tent, but we'll see how that goes. Anyway, she talks about how there were, at least according to her, and I've heard over 100,000, but the number that she gave was 88,000 war crimes documented against civilians. Of course, I haven't even mentioned Israel. It's really hard to imagine how this sort of global hysteria seems to just collide. The Indian crash, obviously terrible, unbelievable, this lone survivor. Kind of doing a news around the horn here today. I don't know why I can't find the Telegraph's Ukraine the latest. But anyway, it's called Ukraine the Latest. It's a podcast. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify. And I hope to get her on my show as well, actually. Very courageous woman. She's done a lot of work just to bring attention to the humanity, the human scale of the tragedy in Ukraine. So 88,000 war crimes was her number that was reported as of yesterday on Ukraine, the latest. Thank you, Mandalorian, of course. Yeah, very heated, very heated. Hi, Roman. My father, again, I used to ask him all the time, said, why was it that we could just become so hysterical during World War II? His answer was always a lack of democracy. just democracy breaking down, and then combined with a lot of bigotry. And it seems to be the same thing now. I mean, this is really bad to me. I mean, there's just no decency here. This is the United States Senate. I mean, you don't want anybody to be treated this way in any meeting, but this is like Goonie behavior. I'm sure you guys know about this. Our German friends maybe can educate more in the comments here, but to me, this is where this was, I guess, when the Rubicon was really crossed for Germany, right? So this was a few years before Kristallnacht, and when we start talking about hysterical stuff in Germany, this was 1934. Hitler had been in power for 2 years, right? And I was looking at this the other day. The range of people killed is actually quite wide. Yeah, casualties officially 85. Estimates range up to 1,000. It's kind of weird. I don't know all the details here, but this is where basically the methed out, drugged out, ketamine laced Nazis started to just go haywire, and there was no repercussions for this. There were actual murders from, the democratic government of the Weimar Republic, and this was where I think the Rubicon was actually crossed. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sandro. Yeah, I mean, definitely Hitler was already in power. It was already going crazy, probably at that time. Uh, I believe Hindenburg didn't even want to approve him. He was already kind of on his deathbed. And anyway, it was here. Yeah, I actually wrote it right here. I believe Hindenburg didn't even want to do this, but he did. He was kind of dying. And so that was 30th January 1933. This occurred on 30th June 1934. So I guess you never know until looking back in hindsight, but we have a birthday tank parade in the United States tomorrow. It's just truly remarkable that that they think that this stuff is important to push on. While you have this, while you have this. I saw the senator was interviewed after, and he was pleading for everybody to not have violent protests tomorrow. Obviously, that's important. But to me, when you look at this stuff, it just seems like provocations to use violence. I know I've said for a while now, it's questionable whether we have midterms in 2026. That's the most important thing. Well, definitely. I'm curious. I mean, I remember reading about this long ago, and I came back to it. Was talking to some friends like this. If something like this happened in America, I think that's when you start to enact like these emergency measures, and you say that just like they were saying to the governor of California, they were saying that the National Guard is there to help. Uh, they use language something like to help alleviate the state from the socialist leadership. I mean, I'm not a fan, like, I'm not a fan of the hard left mantra, but there's procedures, there are institutions. Need to keep this stuff up. So I myself, yeah, Sandra, I don't know where we are actually in this because nothing really is surprising to me anymore. Um, that the Trump administration is just really not mincing words at this point, apologizing for Putin. It's very difficult to see. You also have on the sidelines, you have all this other stuff. I don't know if you saw Hegseth uh, testifying. Like, this is pure yes man behavior, right? So this is a great account. If you don't follow it, Vicegrad24. I believe it's Polish run, but the Vicegrad countries. Says the patch on their soldiers said ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. The joke was that it stood for I Saw Americans Fighting. Look, nobody denies that America is the hegemon when it comes to 21st century military warfare, but here's the list of Allied troops killed in Afghanistan. This is not exhaustive, by the way, because Estonia lost maybe 10. And there was a very good tweet that I retweeted from Tumas Ilves, former president, American Estonian, talking about how, the monuments and everything. And, per capita, these numbers can be quite large. Yes, I know, there's thousands of Americans. I know that. But this is not good behavior. It's not good behavior. My fear is that the provocation. Sorry, I guess here's a good part. My fear is that the provocations are going to lead to an excuse to crack down. So whatever it was here that this purge sort of was allowed to take place, and then probably the scary thing is the reaction after. So no one, as I understand, no one was like jailed here. I mean, this was full on when it became a Nazi regime without, populist socialist without repercussions. The law was basically abandoned from this point in the name of whatever it might have been at the time. It seems to be they're going for excuses to do the same thing. So the question would be if, I mean, could I, again, I'm not in the business of predicting, but, well, maybe I'm in the business of predicting some things, but if this weekend is violent and then they crack down and citizens start to get killed from the crackdown protests, and then, because it's the military or whatever, like, they're not going to be tried. The brown shirts, yeah. So the brown shirts, which eventually became the SS, was Hitler's paramilitary sort of guard troops. It's not looking good. I think it's hard for Bitcoiners too, right? Because there is one person that actually seems to be pretty cautious in the Trump admin still, and that's Besant. So, seasoned Wall Street person. I've heard him talk about Putin like a war criminal. Uh, in these hearings, he's not going to like play the game of whatever Rubio plays and stuff like just this. He's not selling his soul yet completely. He's trying to do what he can in the position that he's in. Um, but if we see people like that go, then I guess it's really time to worry because there's very few people, it seems, in high levels of the administration that aren't either completely yes men or just completely sold their soul, like Rubio. It's not that. So here's a population chart, and then here's the mill chart again. So this one I updated with Cypri updated. Like if you even just take out everybody else, like this is what is causing a lot of havoc right now. Yes, China is a real threat. I understand, but this is what's causing havoc for Europe. Really, it's no match. Yes, they have nukes, but it's unacceptable for every other state in the world. If Russia did use a tactical nuke, I think that every single nuclear armed state and non nuclear armed state would retaliate in some way, saying that it's not okay to just use that to invade a country. They better. Uh, but since the United States is like stepping back, we have, it's much more even playing field. Okay, so remember, this is pre 1999 NATO, less than half the U.S. All right. And plus, it's very dispersed, very not a unified command structure. And then here's us, 91 billion. It was 75 billion last year. No, 70 billion last year, 68 billion. Everybody's going up, everybody's militarizing. And then Ukraine is almost spending as much as all of us in the post 1999 NATO bloc. Yeah, I mean, I think the protests are strong. I think everybody is not willing to accept it. I don't think America is going to go, you know, pure national populist, but it is not. It is so divided, and they're so angry. You can't get the president to stand up and tell the truth. And then after 4 years of a president who could barely even talk, I mean, it's just a terrible looking situation for the leadership. I think that the governor situation of California is a very big canary in the coal mine because it's not just about immigration there. I mean, it's certainly immigration is a big deal, but you can't take the governor's powers away. Um, Look, I've said it for a while. I still think it's not improbable that some sort of a national emergency is created before the elections in the midterms. And then, the question is always what comes after, right? Because, like, after here, it went full on, and there was just no pushback of the law. And that's what I fear is that there's just some point where it doesn't really matter what anybody says. Like, Speaker Johnson is already gone. He's completely given up his, uh, co-equal governing of the House. The Senate at least is hanging on. But the Supreme Court can't enforce anything. Yeah, this is what's definitely scary. I think it'll be better after the midterms. You know, even if you just had Trump and Democratic houses, it would be great, right? The split houses or split government is always the best, really, or at least it used to be back when I was younger, like the Clinton years. Yeah, and I think it's been stated a lot. You know, I mean, people have to follow. You have to follow some of these rulings. You do have to follow the spirit of the Constitution. What mystifies me is the people on the right that are surprised, right? Like all of this was telegraphed. This sort of national, populist, white nationalist sort of view, very Christian, very hard Christian. Um, Again, I was raised Catholic. I'm not. Everybody deserves to be happy. Practice what you want, but yeah, a good memory. He's the most typical of politicians, right? He can completely go 180 and saying that's the right thing for these boys, right thing for these young men after delaying it for, like you said, years. Here we go. You can see it right here. Not years, but a year. This was the flatlining, basically from the end of 2023 all the way to, I guess it was here, wasn't it? And started up again in May. 6 months. But you have a president that doesn't tell the truth on the numbers. Like this is the latest numbers per that Kiel Institute. But you know, he's just saying things like 300, 400 billion that we give and all this stuff. It's just not the truth. It's not the real numbers. Yeah. I do think that Bitcoin can help all this at the end of the day. I do. But it's going to be messy, right? Going to have Russia probably a leader in Bitcoin. Um, America's not going to fall behind. I mean, they'll be there, but again, in the long future, Bitcoin, you know, like Eric Voskuil used to write about, Bitcoin is still something that is antithetical to state governance. So in the long run of the future, we're only allowing, you know, state-sponsored nodes to run transactions through. That's obviously not going to be a good thing. But yeah, I think in the short run, I think it is undeniable that it's going to make things easier and better. It's kind of strange how Europe is going to need to bail out America at this point. I can tell you that these countries, specifically, you know, Visegrad countries, Baltics, Nordics, Germany, I mean, we're not going to go back to this sort of tyranny. And it's unbelievable the apologizing that the admin's doing for Russia. I would agree with this. Some people say she's a bit too hardcore, but I'm glad she's in there. I'm glad she's in there. Being Estonian is another interesting thing here. Saw this one, Tallinn, built by Estonians, Danes, and Germans and Swedes. Right, Tallinn, built by Russians. Um, this comment here, which is interesting too, talks about it's perhaps a function of modern times than anything else. It is true that modern times, anywhere, right? In Monaco, you'd have like kind of just sort of these postmodern concrete, not great apartment buildings, but they're nothing as bad as this. I mean, these Soviet blocks. This is Jason Bourne, right? Jason Bourne movie blocks. We have them too in Latvia. They're everywhere in Eastern Europe, as you guys probably know. It's just terrible. They have to reckon with what they're doing to the world. Terrible news in India. Yeah, I agree. It's not looking great in the UK politically. I think you might get a hard right swing after this hard left government is finished. You can look up in ChatGPT like all the democracies versus autocracies in Europe during the 20s and 30s, and it's half or over half are autocracies. So at least in Europe, I don't think we're there. I mean, we have it in Hungary. I don't even think Slovakia is necessarily there. I think they are struggling. There's a big opposition in Slovakia, but as I understand, you could, Czech elections could swing that way, even though the Czechs are great. And, um, I just thank God for Merz is all I can say at this point for what happened in Germany. Yeah. Mm. Hi, Andrew. Yeah. I think it's just a lot of people that are behind the eight ball, right? And waited too long. If you look at this again, this is military spending. Obviously, China's just been steady here. But let's take out this. I think people struggled a lot here after the crisis. You see that military spending was down everywhere except for China. Oh no, sorry, that's Russia, except for Russia, interestingly. But it was flat or down pretty much everywhere. Certainly it was in the Baltics. And then it only turned around after the invasion of Crimea. But this is such a devaluation of the ruble. It's interesting in dollar terms it falls, but they weren't devalued. They probably weren't. They definitely weren't decreasing spending in their own currency. Yep, that's what scares me. Big ugly. Yeah, people are just really hard left, hard right. Like there's nobody's ready to compromise, come to the middle. And it probably is because of all the failures of politics for 30, 50 years, whatever. That's why we're in Bitcoin, right? I saw the Czech president, who seems fantastic, uh, give a statement at the NATO press conference that, you know, the U.S. should just give a little bit more time to Europe to rearm. Because for all the things that Trump has said or done, the one thing that he has indeed done is allowed NATO countries to spend more, which is great. It's just the fear that, especially with his rhetoric towards Putin, that he's not like that he just wants to do deals with Russia and does not want. He's not recognizing the threat that Russia is bringing. Yeah, I mean the Middle East. I haven't talked about Israel, right? Yeah, he's really great, Sandro. I agree. It's like Reagan said, you know, there's the back in the '80s, the last place on earth. Um, that's another thing too. I've noticed, you know, and I was before 2014. I was kind of in this camp. Was just, you know, let's give up on politics. Let's give up on um, everything. You know, let's just do our autarky or move to some Caribbean island or all that stuff sounds very good. But you know, at the end of the day, not everybody can do that. And also, if you leave, and there's a lot of commentators that, in my view, are pretty centrist, pretty normal in America that are saying, you know, if you do leave, then the baddies, you know, the radicals are just going to get what they wanted. So at some point, someone's got to take responsibility for it. Yeah, there needs to be more light on, you know, on the dictators. Like corruption only works if people cover for you. And from what I understand, that's more or less happening in Hungary. Yeah, okay, there are maybe some opposition parties or whatever, but most of the wealth has been stolen from the top there, and you can see it in Hungary figures. I think a lot of people even don't like that argument because they say, well, this is just maybe it's less shiny, but the U.S. has been having all that corruption anyway. It's just more shiny, or it's more shiny corruption that's happening in Russia. There still are some differences there. I mean, until you see until you see pictures like this, obviously. But um, this just can't. You can't continue with this. You can't just detain. You shouldn't get detain anybody like this. You can have them step out or whatever, but so unnecessary. This is such a um, just for show. Yeah, I'd like to hear more. You know, I don't really met a couple Hungarians at some Bitcoin conferences. I don't really know any Hungarians well, but it's not a personal thing. It's just the government is taken, and what they're doing is exactly what the 2020 Project 2025 stuff does, and it's Trump's having the theater, and every damn press conference he's got 50 people who should be doing a job that are just sitting there like praising dear leader. It's very bad. This is probably sorry. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Well, the question that they're going to push back on, and this gets down to this, this is not nearly Night of the Long Knives stuff, but what for sure the admin side is going to say is he was unruly, he was pushing, shoving, and asked a question when he shouldn't have asked. I haven't seen enough footage to see if that's true or not, but he claimed that he didn't. He just tried to ask a question. We'll see, but at least he wasn't fully like. At least he's not in jail now. They had the sense enough to not fully arrest him. I think this is probably a lot of the problem too in both Europe and America. If you look at old Europe and America, is just massive government spending. And I think Americans get mad because Europe was always spending more on welfare, right? Like this is basically social welfare. This is European life, while America was not spending that. And now we are. So it's not like we can really say we're different. But this is old Europe spending a lot on their system and government. And America's just mad at it, I guess. Meanwhile, former communist countries, except for China, look at that. Unbelievable. $6 trillion a year. What else do you guys think? I hope. I hope you can just, we can have at least in the U.S., have a weekend of more comedy rather than violence. But when you bring in all the tanks to the capital city, I also saw that they have a budget to fix the roads after the tanks drive on the roads. It's like, what are you guys doing? It doesn't make any sense other than set the table for, crackdowns to me. When you're having a military birthday party, tank parade. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that was going on too. And it's not even his birthday, right? They're just doing that because it's better to do that in the summer. It's like when the actual king doesn't care enough for this, because isn't there something about his birthday could also be connected, the royal's birthday, to this trooping of the color? But anyway, the fact that it's not his birthday, and meanwhile in the U.S., the president, the country of no kings, is just doing a military parade on his birthday. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, we still have our heads over here. We may not have resources, but we have our heads. I'm curious how the Germans are doing, though. If there's still like a faction that's really angry, and perhaps understandably angry. I mean, you had to take in all the refugees for the last 10 years, which was totally a result of Russian and American wars. I can imagine there's a lot of anger in Germany. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it, right? Let's not take ourselves too seriously, but every time you just see things like this, it's difficult. Like this is the same it's the same attitude that he took after the Signal Gate. This is like he can do no wrong. He can just say whatever he wants. I'm not saying you have to be like too political, but you can't poo-poo on your allies even if you'd like them to do more. You might need them at some point. It's a good number right there. 6,000 Ukrainians served in Iraq, 14 killed. And of course, you get the right winger comments. But anyway, yeah. Well, Schultz was just an abomination there. Very sad. All I can tell you is we're very, very lucky. We feel very lucky that Mertz is there. And it's almost like if this, when you think about the Americans' problems, like the American problems that were caused by the Iraq, for sure, the Iraq War. Uh, Obviously, Afghanistan didn't end up well either. But it's like this current administration is just washing their hands of it. And that Afghanistan evacuation, I'm sure you all heard, that was Trump's plan, by the way. Biden just carried it out. Of course, he carried it out poorly, but it was Trump's plan. It seems like we continue to just wash our hands of the mistakes that we made rather than at least try to make amends. Europe took in a lot of refugees because of Americans' excursions in the Middle East. And I can't imagine that there's frustration there. But then we just seem to take all of our anger out on the Hispanics. Yeah, as a whole, as a whole nother thing. I don't even know what to say about that, to be honest. Yeah, understood, understood, understood. SPD is still in very influential positions. That's unbelievable. Ukrainians bombed it. I mean, I'm not. It's not a secret. I'll show you guys if you don't know this. So when first of all, they're at war, so I can understand why they did it. But there was an article that came out in Der Spiegel like years ago. I'll find it. Here it is. Again, I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm not going to say this equivocally. But so this came out in August of 2023. All right, so that happened about a year prior. It happened in the fall or something of 2021. What is this crazy advertisement? I can't get this out. But anyway, here's the here's the article. You read this. It's thoroughly investigated. Seems pretty logical that they had the motive. And it should have never been built in the first place. And it was used, this is a terrible, I mean, again, I've talked about this many times. You can see these old Soviet cartoons where a German and a Frenchman are looking into a pipe and they're like, I don't see what the problem is. And then the pipe goes back into a Russian tank. Like it's not rocket science that they're going to weaponize their cheap energy. But so this article came out in 2023. And if you noticed, I don't know if you're following this, but it didn't come out in the American press until a full year later, like summer of last year. August, I don't know, June, July. I don't remember when like it started to come out in the New York Times, started coming out in the Wall Street Journal. This was already vetted in Germany in an English speaking, I'm sure it was in German originally, but they also put it in English. It's not like this was a secret, really, if you were looking hard enough. It was very strange to me that it sort of like, if you recall, let me just even find on Twitter when when the news broke in the U.S. It was like it was a full year after this. So that to me is more interesting than the fact that it happened itself. Anyway, I can't find it, but it was very curious to me that it took a year to get to American media. It took a year to come out in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. I don't know. I can imagine Germany's not happy. I mean, it's still I don't know what you call it. But one of the parties of this thing is a country that's invading them. So of course they feel justified in doing it. Of course the other side is an ally. So it's a pretty tricky situation. But yeah, I don't think this was actually much of a secret. But again, they're not going to speak about it. I can just point you to articles. I don't know anything else myself. Yeah, this was Trump's comments basically, and the constant equivocating. saying, well, I'm not happy what Putin's been doing, but I'm not happy about the Ukrainians either. And it's like one side is defending their land. At the end of the day, regarding this specific situation, this specific problem, nobody's going to nuke anybody if the U.S. would kick this country the fuck out of Ukraine. No one's going to nuke anybody. And we've waited 3 years. And as far as I can tell, this country is not stopping. Not stopping. I can't even look at this moron. You guys follow Darth Putin? Darth Putin is a great follow. Absolutely great follow. We don't have to just, I don't have to quote tweets and stuff, but basically, great sarcasm on Putin, and then always ending it basically that I remain a master strategist. And this is basically what Trump is allowing. Precisely. I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but the only way this stops, it is coming down, the trend. But the only way this stops is if they are stopped. Yep. I've really learned a lot from Anthony Scaramucci, who I was glad we got to interview. But you know, that is 100% his doctrine. Right? Elon Musk learned that the hard way. 80 people in his administration learned that the hard way from the first time around. There's no one around from the first time that's like really been loyal. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There definitely are some lower level people, but everybody that was in a normal position is not there now. This is like bottom of the barrel people, uh, and radical people. It's always about him and Musk. You know, I can't imagine. That was actually the title that I was alluding to of this stream. Like, could you imagine what we were talking about a week ago? It was only Musk's narcissistic, uh, hilarious venge tweets, and then he deletes them, which Scaramucci was right about as well. He thought he would do that, try to make amends, but there's no one that comes into contact with Trump and then comes out unburned, except for maybe Zelensky. Of course, he was burned in that meeting, but he keeps coming back. Trump says he has no cards, and Ukrainians continue to show they have cards. Anyway, I appreciate you guys listening. You know, I get bogged down in the news from this war. I just pulled this up for fun. I don't know if there's any European country that interests you there, but you got Russia losing to this country. It's 3 times smaller GDP per capita. Either way, I think you're right, Roman. like, how much better would the world be if they just focused on their own country? Well, I'm going to start to ramble if I stay on more than I usually ramble. So, not sure what else to say other than pray for peace this weekend and comedy and not violence. Do check out Ukraine the Latest. It's a great podcast from the Telegraph. I don't know why they don't have a direct feed there, but Ukraine the Latest podcast from the Telegraph. And Oleksandra, who was on last night, talked about 88,000 war crimes. Terrible. But what we got to keep fighting. I'm going to leave it there, guys. Have a great weekend. Thank you, as always, for giving great feedback and comments here, and I really enjoy it. And pray for peace, hope for comedy. Take care, guys. Really appreciate it.